It still surprises some people to find out that the overall consensus among non-religious secular historians is that it is a fact, not opinion, but a fact, that Yeshua, whom we know as Jesus Christ, was a real man who did exist and was crucified. And that says a whole lot when you're talking about somebody who walked the earth some 2,000 years ago, to not only say that he exists, but how he died. All right, because historians and detectives and investigators and researchers, when they want to reconstruct a major event or a crime, they never rely on just one thing. All right, they gather evidence, and not just evidence, but in particular, they're looking for multiple independent sources. All right, they're looking for sources that are independent from each other. And what that means is evidence A does not rely on evidence B, or evidence B does not rely on evidence A. All right, or witness 1 did not get their information from witness 2. Witness 2 did not get their information from witness 1. These sources are independent. All right, and when these sources all start to point to the same person, to the same place, in the same time frame, that is one of the strongest indicators for historians and investigators and detectives that a major event or a crime did truly take place. Now, I want you to notice what Luke writes here. He says, in the 15th year in the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea, and Herod being tetrarch of Galilee, and his brother Philip, tetrarch of the region of Iturea and Trachonitis, and Lysanias, tetrarch of Abilene, during the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas. Notice that Luke is giving names, he's giving titles, he's giving the region, and he's giving the time frame. And by doing this, Luke, in a way, is challenging the reader to go back and check behind him to confirm if what he's saying is true or not. One thing about it, if somebody's telling a lie or making up a story, the last thing they want to do is give you a bunch of details, because it opens them up for you to go check behind them to confirm if they're telling the truth or not. But Luke is doing the complete opposite. He is giving those details so you can check behind him, so you can confirm that what he's saying is not something fictitious, but it's something that is real. It's something that truly happened. Look what Matthew writes here. Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ?" They all said, "Let him be crucified." Notice that Matthew brings up the same Pontius Pilate who Luke brought up. And not only that, we see here that Pontius Pilate was aware that Jesus was called the Christ. Now that's important because as of right now, we've only looked at biblical sources. But what happens when we look for an independent source outside of the Bible? What happens when we look at Roman history? Because after all, this took place during the Roman Empire. Here's a man by the name of Tacitus, who's considered to be one of the greatest Roman historians. And what we're about to read has been dated back all the way to within 100 years of when Yeshua was crucified. So let's look at what Roman history says. He goes on to write, "Consequently, to get rid of the report, narrow fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christ, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate." Now, I don't know about you, but that seems very similar to what Matthew and Luke wrote. Same names, same people, same region, and the same event. Here is another independent source outside of the Bible that validates what Luke and Matthew wrote. This is a man named Josephus, and he is a first century renowned Jewish historian. He writes, "About this time, there lived Jesus, a wise man. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men amongst us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him. And the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct at this day." So here we have another independent source outside of the Bible that brings up the same names and the same events within the same time frame. What's interesting is if you take a look at what Tacitus and Josephus wrote, both of them said that those who followed Jesus were called Christians. In particular, Tacitus says they were called Christians by the populace, the people. Well, what's interesting about that is if we look at what Luke wrote in the book of Acts 11 verse 26, he says for a whole year, they met with the church and taught a great many people. And in Antioch, the disciples were first called Christians. Who were they called Christians by? Like Tacitus said, the populace, the people. It was an exonym. In other words, they were called Christians by outsiders and not themselves. That was not a name originally that Christians gave themselves. That was a name that was given to them by outsiders. But here we see two independent sources, both Luke and Tacitus, saying the same thing. Let's look at the book of Acts chapter 18. Here we see Luke write, after this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth, and he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. So here we have Luke once again giving us a name, giving us a region and a time frame. In other words, he's challenging the reader one more time. Go back and look because I'm giving you facts that you can go back and confirm. So let's see, do we have any independent sources that can corroborate what Luke is saying or what Luke wrote? In fact, does Roman history testify to this? Because after all, Claudius is a Roman emperor. So let's go look at some Roman history talking about when Claudius reigned. And for that, we'll go to a Roman historian who lived in the 1st century by the name of Suetonius. He writes in his biography about Claudius, he writes, since the Jews constantly made disturbances at the instigation of Chrestus, he expelled them from Rome. So here we have an independent source, Roman history outside of the Bible, that is validating what Luke wrote inside of the Bible. Now, where it gets fun at is if we scroll down to verse 12, look what Luke writes here. He says, but when Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews made a united attack on Paul and brought him before the tribunal, saying, this man is persuading people to worship God contrary to the law. But when Paul was about to open his mouth, Gallio said to the Jews, if it were a matter of wrongdoing or vicious crime, I would have reason to accept your complaint. But since it is a matter of questions about words and names in your own law, see to it yourselves. I refuse to be the judge of these things, and he drove them from the tribunal. So here we have Luke once again bringing another name up, all right, and telling us not only his name, but his title. And not only that, he is even giving us his ruling on this situation. Now, once again, let's look to see if we have any independent sources outside of the Bible that can confirm this. Here we find something known as the Gallio inscription, stone fragments that were discovered in 1905 that were inscribed on by none other than Claudius Caesar around 52 AD. And within those inscriptions, Claudius Caesar makes mention of a friend and proconsul that he has by the name of Junius Gallio, which goes to show you, once again, more independent sources that corroborate and strengthen the validity of what Luke writes in the book of Acts chapter 18. So what we've seen are multiple independent sources who all point to the same people in the same places within the same time frame. The Bible is not a myth. It is not a fairy tale. It is not a book that was written by one man who wanted to create a fictitious religion based on a fictitious savior. But the Bible is composed of multiple writings written by multiple authors who all testify to the same real savior, Yeshua, whom we know as Jesus Christ. And not only that, like we've seen today, there are plenty of external evidences that prove and strengthen and confirm the validity of what's been written in the Bible by those authors. And today was just a tip of the iceberg. There's plenty of more external evidence that shows the validity of the Bible. Not only that, remember, these authors left details. These details were there so we could go back to check behind them. That is not a sign of somebody who's trying to hide something. That is not a sign of somebody who wants to create a lie or make up a story, but that is a sign of somebody who knows that what they're writing is the truth.